What's up, everyone, and welcome to Nine Rise this year, 2020. Obviously, we wish we could be in person. We just weren't able to be due to COVID and things like that. But we wanted to at least offer some resource to the parents of our students. And we thought a video would be a great way to talk through some of the concepts we would have talked through in person. So welcome to Nine Rise. My name is Matt Densky. I'm the student ministry pastor here at Fellowship Greenville. And I just want to take a little bit of time, the next 15 minutes, to talk through this specific phase of life, high school phase specifically. Because if you're watching this, you have a student who has just come into high school, or maybe you have a student who's currently in high school, and you are trying to figure out or better understand this phase of life. And so I want to do two things during this video. I first want to summarize and recap adolescent culture as a whole and just talk through where they're at today, the dominant thoughts contributing to motive and actions and culture and things like that. So I want to talk through adolescent culture, and then I want to give 5 practical applications of what that means for parents of the high school phase. So let's start kind of decades ago, and maybe some of you have heard me teach on this, and that's okay. This will be a refresher for you, but let's just talk through the evolution of adolescence for a second. The first thing I want to let you know is adolescence is a cultural phenomenon on a global scale. It's happening all around the world because we live in such a connected world, and adolescence is rapidly evolving. No one is ahead of it. We're only playing catch up. Psychologists, researchers, counselors, church leaders, parents, we're all playing catch up to this thing called adolescence because it's evolving so rapidly. In the 50s, adolescence was basically limited to the ages of 13 to 18. And the number one thought on the mind of an adolescent in the 50s, 1950s, was, who am I? And it was all about identity. And it stemmed from post-World War II, family systems beginning to deteriorate, substance abuse on the rise, really questioning, who am I now? There was no prescription for things like PTSD yet or things like that. And so coming out of World War II, a lot of adolescents began to really question who they were. And so identity was the dominant thought on the mind of an adolescent in the 50s. And it stayed that way for a couple of decades until the 1970s. And then adolescence shifted. There was this undertone that took place. And the new thought, the new dominating thought, it was not about identity, it was about purpose. The question became, why do I matter? What's my place in this world? How am I contributing? It was all about purpose. And that stayed the dominant thought until about the year 2000. And a new shift took place in the culture of adolescence, and it's still happening today. And so in the year 2000, something happened that still applies today, 20 years later. It's not identity, it's not purpose, it's belonging. And the number one thought, the driving thought on the mind of adolescents today is, where do I belong? Modern day adolescence is not limited to 13 to 18 like it was in the 50s. It has expanded. The bookends are moving in different directions, so it actually begins younger and ends later. Modern day adolescence typically is understood as 9 years old to about 30 years old. It's a 20-year window due to a lot of contributing factors that in this 15-minute video I can't go over, but it's a large window. And the driving thought, this is the important part, the driving thought is belonging. Where do I belong? It motivates decisions, it influences actions, it is the dominant thought on the mind of adolescents. And a lot of it has to do, maybe you're wondering, like, why the year 2000? What happened in 2000? A lot of it has to do with the rise and introduction of the internet, or at least the internet becoming a normal part of our lives. And in the year 2000, there was really a shift that took place in terms of internet. You and I had to learn technology and learn social media and learn internet. Adolescents today are digital nomads. They were born into it. It's second nature. It's a part of their worldview. They didn't learn it, they inherited it. It's theirs. So they think about it differently. It's how they engage. The year 2000, internet really starts to rise, becomes this normal thing. A few years later, we would be introduced to the first smartphone. And all of a sudden, you have the world at your fingertips, immediate access. And so this created some dynamics within modern day adolescent culture. More than ever, we're connected, but also more than ever, we're isolated in a sense, and loneliness is on the rise. And social media platforms have this incredible ability to connect you to people who are far away, but make you feel distant from the people who are right next to you. And so over time, certain things like conversational skills and being present in the moment and relational abilities with those right around me began to deteriorate, and adolescents really began to cling to connectivity at a distance. Who's my followers? Who liked my post? What am I doing? And so the concept of sharing really began to rise. In other words, if I want to belong, I need to invite people into my life through these social media platforms. How do I do that? Sharing. So I post about me. I have stories about me. I have Snapchats about me. I have TikToks about me and my experiences. And this is such a driving force that it is not uncommon for students to fake experiences just so that they have something to share. Why is sharing such a big deal? Because the more I share, the more connectivity I have. The more connectivity I have, the more I feel like I belong. But there's a problem. Social media is a synthetic platform. It's an artificial connection. True community and true connection happen in proximity to one another, in the flesh, incarnate, the idea that God would take on flesh and live among us. That's connectivity. And that's very, very hard to achieve, if not impossible to achieve, through social media platforms. And so while students desire to belong more than ever, they're feeding into a system that makes them feel like they're belonging, but in actuality is only leaving them more and more hollow. And so this desire to belong just keeps growing. And so social media and internet and things like that have actually splintered adolescent culture, fractured it. And so it's just not as simple as from this age, these 5 years, 13 to 18, they're in high school, then they're an adult. It's just not that simple anymore. It is splintered and fractured. There's a global connectivity with an immediate isolation. So if belonging is the driving force on the mind of an adolescent, how do we as parents go after that? How do we apply that? So the question is, how can we create belonging in our families for our high school students? And that's what I want to tackle next. So I want to give you 5 practical applications of how to create belonging in your family with your high school student. And the first one would be this. It's a really simple concept, but it's kind of hard to apply sometimes. I would say creating shared experiences with your student is one of the most special and important things you can possibly do. I mean, let's face it, life is busy. We're in ruts and routines. Monday evening we do this. Tuesday evening we have soccer practice. Wednesday we're there. Thursday we have, we go to track practice or whatever. There's always something to do, and then it just stacks up and stacks up and stacks up. And before we know it, months have gone by, a year has gone by, and we're trying to recall like the family experiences. And it's like, when did we do anything together that was intentionally planned and not accidental? For high school students, I would say create shared experiences, intentionally shared experiences together. This may mean you have to pull out the calendar and circle dates and block them off and say no to all these other things so that you can say yes to this one thing. Shared experiences achieve a few things. It achieves memories, laughter, oftentimes. It also achieves trust and vulnerability. Because when we share experiences together, it starts to bond us. And so as parents, to be able to create rituals, routines, rhythms in our family that say, okay, our time together will not be accidental and it won't be leftovers when life calms down or slows down. We will create moments for our family. And this might mean you have to say no to a lot of other things, and that's okay. But creating shared experiences lends itself to trust. Think about how Jesus did ministry. He invited his disciples into his rhythms, and they would do ministry together, sharing those experiences together. It's a significant thing. So plan for shared experiences. Don't let them just be accidental. The second thing I would say in terms of creating belonging in your family is as parents to have empathy for our children. So it's easy to sometimes, as an adult, look at a generation and be like, man, they don't even get it. They don't even know. They don't have it nearly as hard as I did or whatever else. And some of that may be true, but at the same time, some of that's not true. They're going through the exact same things you and I went through at their age. They're wrestling with loneliness. They're trying to fit in. They're insecure. They're trying to discover themselves. They're looking for belonging. And so to have empathy, to remember and recall back to when we were their age, and be patient and gracious, and to step into their worldview and to have empathy for them is this amazing thing. It helps them buy into the fact that they're known and understood and loved in the midst of where they're at. The scriptures say that Jesus can sympathize with us in our weaknesses because he was tempted in every way just like we are. God himself put on flesh and became human so that he could better relate to humans. And similarly, we as parents need to be able to empathize with the plight of our students. Where are they at and what are they going through? And this might mean, parents, we have to do a little bit of homework. You know, if you were going to be a missionary in a country somewhere, you would study and learn that culture. If you were going to get a new job, you would study and learn the skill set required to do well in that job. But as I said earlier, adolescence is evolving rapidly. And for parents, what this means is we have to do some homework and understand what is it like today for a high schooler. And we got to dig into some resources and start to learn their worldview so that we can better empathize with where they're at. The third thing I would say to create belonging is to shift our authority in some ways. So here's what I mean. As parents, we have a positional authority in the lives of our children. We're parents. Hey, do this because I'm your parent. I'm asking you, I'm telling you, do that. You have a positional authority. But as your student gets older, positional authority begins to decline, as you may have noticed by now, and saying things like, because I'm your parent, I said so, it just doesn't work like it did when they were 5. So shifting the authority from positional to relational can be an extremely helpful thing for a parent of a high school student. So in other words, you're not leveraging your position, you're leveraging your relationship. So it might sound like this. Instead of saying, hey, I'm your parent, I said so, it might sound like, hey, I'm your parent, do you trust me? You're leveraging relational equity rather than positional influence. And so as you've been making deposits in the relationship all these years, while positional authority may be declining, relational authority has been increasing. And at some point, there's a crossroads, and it's typically in early high school, and to switch over and begin to leverage trust and relationship rather than position and authority can be an extremely helpful way to create belonging in the lives of our students. The fourth thing I would say is this. As high schoolers, they are moving from thinking like an engineer. That's how a middle schooler thinks. An engineer. How does this work? How does it all connect? How does this function? In high school, they start thinking like a philosopher. It's no longer how does this work? It's why does it work this way? Is there a better way? Should there be a different way? They are thinking like a philosopher. And they are questioning a lot of things. They are throwing stuff against a wall and seeing what sticks. They're poking and prodding. It's natural and normal for a high schooler to do this, and even do this spiritually. They have a lot of questions about Jesus. They have a lot of doubts about all this. And I think sometimes as parents, we hear those and we sense those and we get really scared. Like, no, don't ask that. Don't think that. And we just snuff out that curiosity. But it's not like it goes anywhere. It just gets bottled up. I would say one of the greatest things you could do as parents is to create a culture where a student can vocalize questions and vocalize doubts and engage in a conversation with you about those things so that they can be led to the clarity that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. So when they're doubting, don't be scared by that. Embrace those questions and conversations. If that can't happen in the home, they'll have them elsewhere. And you don't have as much control with who they're talking to there. And so create a culture where conversations about questions and doubts is embraced and safe. The home should be the place where that's safe, right? The fifth and final thing I would say to create belonging is to empower your student. Empower them. It's time for their faith to become their own. It's time for their faith to move from belief system to application. It's time for their hands to get dirty. The disciples in Jesus' day, we tend to think of them as like middle-aged men following this 30-year-old rabbi around, but they weren't. They were teenagers. Most biblical scholars think they were 13, 14, 15-year-old, maybe. And Jesus invited these teenagers in, which was culturally normal there, kind of different here in America, modern day, but culturally normal there, invited them in and empowered them with the ministry of the kingdom of God. Adolescents today are world changers. They're amazing influencers. They have scope and reach and influence, and they need to be empowered. They need to learn how to apply their faith. Not just believe it, not just know what we believe, but why we actually believe it. And that happens through empowering them. And so this might mean for you to give them little chunks of responsibility, helping them step up into certain things, building their confidence, trial and error. They're gonna fail, and that's okay. Learning what to do after failure is part of the process. And so meet them with grace and encouragement, and let's get at it again. But empower them with different things, but especially faith things. So to create belonging in the home, these 5 again: create shared experiences or rituals together, have empathy for where they're at in life, begin to capitalize your relational equity over your positional authority, embrace doubts and questions they might have, and empower them, mobilize them for the kingdom of God. When we create belonging at home, when students feel like they can belong at home, we are achieving, we're feeding the greatest desire that adolescents have today. Parents, thanks so much for watching. I hope this has been helpful. I love you guys. I believe in you guys. You guys are rock stars and heroes, man. May Jesus bless you and help you as you parent the high school phase.